This place is filled, it's not because of me. It's not because of our worship. It's the gifts that you see that are ministering to you.
Every season that this church has gone through, it's been about reaching people, and not just people here in McAllen, but people in the Rio Grande Valley.
Our church is not just about you coming in and God meeting your needs. It's about Him being the Lord of your life, and that God puts a mission on your life. Amen?
What God has done through TFC in the last 75 years has been fluid. It's become one thing, it's done another. It's changed this, it's changed that. It's the hand of God on a community for a very specific purpose.
When the church was started, a prophecy came forth. And that prophecy said this, that this church would be a lighthouse of the valley, a beacon of light to warn and guide, to reach a lost and a dying world. And one of the things that we've seen over the years, that God's hand has been on this church, even though it's gone through some tough times and some challenges. You know, it sprung back because of God's promise. And today we praise God that God's doing incredible things here.
In 1946, there was a group of people that they came down to the valley and they started a tent revival. And during the 40s, there was a huge wave going across the United States, and there were tent meetings everywhere.
It was for healing, and Daisy Wilbanks started it down off Old Business 83, and it ran 7 days a week, and people came, and it went for many years.
They had this tent set up, and every morning, the ladies, the mothers of the church, they would, back in the day, they would make breakfast, they would get their kids off, and then they immediately went to the tent, and they would pray 3-4 hours, and then they'd rush home real quick, get all their household chores done, and then the kids would come home from school.
This is an incredible thing to think that's the history, that's the legacy of TFC.
Our church has this glorious history of being birthed in prayer.
When I came here, I found out a lot about the history of the church, and it's gone through several different names, and somewhere in the 60s it was literally called Church of the Good Shepherd.
The first church was called Revival Center, and when they moved over here on McCall, they changed the name to the Church of the Good Shepherd.
That church really grew and became a focal point of spiritual activity as well as Christian education here in the Rio Grande Valley.
At one point, Church of the Good Shepherd, it was one of the largest churches in the valley in the 80s, and it was over 1,500 people.
There's some things that happen sometimes in churches when people don't get along, and boards and pastors and different things. I don't want to get all the nitty-gritty of that, but it started to decline, and there was a rift literally between the board and the pastor at the time, and there was a major church split. And from that point on, Good Shepherd started going down, 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 until the time that we came 26 years ago. It was down to about 50 people. We were in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and we felt like we were supposed to branch out into pastor. We had no idea where, and we got the call to come down to the Rio Grande Valley and to try out this church. We were in our 30s, and everybody that was in the congregation, like I said, for the most part, was over 60. And we had this burden on our heart that our church was supposed to be about reaching families.
When John and I came, we told him, look, our vision is young families with children and serving the valley, and all we had was old people. I think we had there was 2 families beside us that had kids, and so when we came, we doubled children's church. Just like that. It was no big deal.
They interviewed me, the whole board, and they took me out and spent a lot of time talking to me about all kinds of things. And when they were done, I said, okay, I need to talk to you. I said, I know the vision that's inside of me, and I got to make sure that you guys are good with that. And I said, we're called to have a family church. You know, that's what we're called to do. And I'll never forget, they all looked at each other and said, well, we really don't have a vision at all. And we know we're old and we need kids, so we're good with that. And the funny thing about it is they were really good with it in that meeting until there was started to be a lot of kids.
We had no children's church. Like what we have now is amazing compared to what we had then. Then it was just, we called it the fellowship hall. It was what is now the MP room. And we built some kind of a little fake stage, and we did puppets and we did songs. And during those first year or so, I would do the adult worship, and I'd get off the stage, we'd take all the kids, we'd go into the other room.
I remember getting called in one day because, you know, some doors were broken and they were like, okay, we can't have this. And I'm like, when you have kids and you have teenagers, stuff's gonna happen. You guys wanted this kind of church. And they all were great about it and were accepting and loved the idea to see all the young families that have come.
Every week we would see increase, not, 5 or 10 here, 5 or 10 there. It wasn't a big amount, but people just started coming and they wanted to be a part and they wanted to help. We just spent the first 2 years just loving on these people and, being a part of their lives and encouraging them and talking vision and talking change. And, they went with us. They went with us all the way. And now, you look where we are now. This wasn't even like a thought when John and I first moved down here. We knew that we were called to be pastors. We knew that our life was committed to here, and to hear the backstory of the church and the anointing that was on this church. It's not just a group of people, it's the heart of the ministry. So when we came down and I talked to Mrs. Snowden and Mrs. Bunger and so many other ladies, and they began to share those things with me, it just stirred it up in my spirit. And I went home and I told John, I'm like, this place is anointed, it's going to be healed, and we are going to grow.
So we did this outreach here in McAllen. It was very, very successful. And the next Sunday we had like 10 different people that came from the outreach. And the problem was it was an English-speaking service, and all the people that came from the outreach could only speak Spanish. I literally met with all those people afterwards, and through a translator, they just told me, they said, Pastor, we love your church, but we're not going to come when it's only translation. And that broke my heart, and realizing that we need to do something. And I remember shortly thereafter, I went on vacation, and we were driving, and we're driving that long drive from San Antonio to McAllen, and all you see is mesquite trees for hundreds of miles. And I'm just looking at the mesquite trees. I think Terry was driving, and it just came into my heart, we need to start a Spanish service.
En el 2001 llegamos a esta iglesia por primera ocasión. De hecho, la primera iglesia cristiana a la cual nosotros asistimos. Aquí fue en este santuario, precisamente fue el lugar en donde nosotros escuchamos el Evangelio presentado de una manera que impactó nuestras vidas, de tal manera que ese día decidimos seguir a Cristo. Ese día dijimos, sí, Señor, te hacemos nuestro Señor y Salvador de nuestras vidas.
So we started the Spanish ministry, and throughout the years, it's kind of had its ups and downs as far as who was leading it. And I remember at one point, we're at a place where we really needed another Spanish pastor. And, Milton had been with us for quite a long time, been really close, and walked him through some different things. And, we just saw something on Milton. If you hear him speak today, it's obvious. But back then, it was kind of this developing thing in Milton, this gift that God had given him, this calling.
Y un día el pastor John me llama y dice que quiere verse conmigo para desayunar. La verdad es que yo estaba un poco preocupado. Dije, bueno, ¿qué fue lo que hice? Que me he metido en problemas. Y no, el pastor realmente tenía una palabra muy fuerte para mí.
And I remember, taking him out for breakfast and speaking to him and saying, Milton, I think you're the guy. He kind of struggled with it, and we just walked through that process. And I said, Milton, you know what? Do you believe that God has a call on your life, that He's put a gift inside of you? And he said, yes. And he stepped in and for many years became the Spanish pastor and really just did an incredible job for us. You know, over the years, we've made different shifts in our church to fulfill the vision that God has for this church. And I think it's really important to understand it's not my vision, it's God's vision. And during the whole time, there was just points where I just felt God's leading.
For the first 12 years of us being here, we had a major building project going on every single year.
The building that we have for youth ministry here in McAllen right now was our church. And the first building that we built after that was the children's ministry. We built the children's ministry before we built the sanctuary. At one point in our church history, literally, our children's ministry was a lot better than our sanctuary. It had a better sound system, better lights, had better everything. Because we put this huge emphasis, on children's ministry.
It's always been about families first, family first. If you put a dartboard on a wall, it would be young families with children, and then it'd be families with teenagers, and then it would be college age, and then it would be us older people. But we kept that vision, not just before John and I, but before our staff. And we always said, if we're going to throw a dart and we're going to hit the middle, it's got to be young families with children.
And then there was just other transformations that we made through the time where God just really led us on how we change our worship. Worship's huge when you start talking about having a family church. You can have more of a traditional worship set, which is going to bring an older set, or you can have a more progressive set. And I remember we were kind of at this place that our worship wasn't exactly where it needed to be, and I didn't know what to do. And I remember one day we were having a pre-service prayer, and I was praying, and God dropped on me that I had to hire somebody.
Come on, stand up on your feet with me this morning. Welcome to TFC. Are you ready to worship God?
Went to the board, said we're supposed to make this move, and they said, we don't agree with you. We think you're wrong, but if you think it's God, we can't say no. And so they gave me the freedom to go and find somebody. And it's so funny, we weren't even looking at the time. We were sending some teenagers on a mission trip, and we went to our old church. Terry went with them, I didn't go. My wife calls me that night. She goes, I just found our worship leader. I said, who is it? She's this guy. He looks really cool. His name is Nathan. His wife is Star. Star used to be a part of our youth group. Do you remember that? I'm like, yeah. And we had him come down, and it was just an immediate connection. They spent 18 years with us, and really an integral part of who we are and how we've become the type of church that we are.
I know when we went to change the name from the Church of the Good Shepherd to the Family Church, I was one of those that was like, oh, are we going to lose our identity? And John said to me, we're going to gain our identity. And I thought, you know what, that's right.
Our name need to represent who we are. And Church of the Good Shepherd is a wonderful name, but it doesn't really represent who we are. And so when we really prayed about it and thought about it, it was like, who are we? What's the thing that distinguishes us, that makes us who we are? And we all knew what it was. It was the family church.
We had this vision, this understanding that it was to reach more people, always.
And I'll never forget when we got to do that, and it was just like a new life came.
It felt like home. Even though I wasn't a Christian yet, I had no idea why people were raising their hands. There was a blonde white woman named Star Funk who was leading worship, who led the altar call that I got saved in. But I knew that I was home.
Over the years, things have just grown on their own. I could go down a list of 100 people who have been at the family church at the right time to say, I'll pick that responsibility up and I'll do that. New staff members, we'll pick that up and we'll do that. And our younger staff, they took John and I from, you have to wear a suit every Sunday to, and a dress every Sunday, and they took us to where it's okay to wear blue jeans. And they've had to pull, our younger staff have had to pull John and I along a lot of the time because we're old and we don't, we still want to think out of this box. And they have taught us to go, whoop, let's get rid of some of these barriers. let's get rid of them. Let's not keep them. Let's become a church that is relevant for today, for young families, for children.
The vision really is the name, and people know who we are by that name. About 5 years ago, God changed our heart. You know, we were all about reaching ourselves, a little Bless Me Club, and that was good. We saw some great things happen, but God changed our heart, and He put the community on our heart. It's about reaching the hurting. It's about reaching those that, man, that just feel like life is on top of them. There's no way out.
At some point, John and I purposefully said, we got to raise up the younger generation. When we go, this can't just fall apart. By the time we're ready to retire, we already have to have a group of people coming and going.
It's always been on our heart is to train people, and to train people for what God's called them to do. And that's part of a family, and that's part of the next generation in serving people.
I remember one Sunday, I'm sitting on the front row getting ready to minister. And the Spirit of God just comes on me, and He literally says this to me. He says, up to this point, you've been a builder, but you're going to change, you're going to become a mentor. We worked so hard to build the church, but now God wanted me to shift from building the church to building the next generation.
Here at TFC, we have what we call the G1 program, and it's something that the Lord has had on mine and John's heart for many years. And what we do is we encourage students who maybe feel like there's a call of God on their lives, or maybe they've just graduated from high school and they're not really sure what they're going to do and where they're going to go. And so our G1 program is a discipleship program, and in the mornings they have... For us, it was training them. How do you do ministry? Like, how do you plan to do a Bible study? How do you set a budget? How do you do the most basic things of church life that most people don't know anything about? These are our first babies, and so we're super duper proud of them, and we feel like the cream has risen to the top here.
I started our second class, and that was when actually Pastor Ricky and Pastor Nikki were part of that group.
I was 19 and a half to be exact. And I was praying, God, what's my next step? What do you have for me?
I didn't even know how to look up a Bible verse. I had no idea what it meant to work in full-time ministry at all. I didn't even know that was what I was called to.
Man, it was hard. It was tough. It stripped you of yourself. It made you really, you know how the word says to put yourself to death, to crucify yourself? That's exactly what we're doing in the program and walking through it. And if I can look back, man, I'm so glad I did it, because we had individuals like Danae that was in there. Pastor John would come and speak with us. So it was very helpful for a group of 19, 20, 22-year-olds getting that kind of direction from TFC staff.
Required commitment, they required persistence, they required a work ethic that I had never been expected to do before. But now sitting on the other side of the table, where I know what the end goal is, and the end goal is to train up the next generation of ministers in a way that are going to have the endurance and the ability to carry out what God's got planned for the world here after this.
It's been really impactful to be able to have something that we can really impart into the next generation and help train them to what God's called them to be.
I would say I didn't know what I was a part of until I became part of it, and now carrying forward, I know that I was a part of a legacy of the family church that's going to keep multiplying and keep growing over the years.
Expansion was always something that we're going to be doing. I didn't understand how much, but we got to a place where we were starting to fill this building up in McAllen, and we're like, okay, what's the next step?
We were thinking about possibly building a bigger sanctuary.
The conversation started about TFC doing a campus.
Our heart's biggest decision should be, I'm going to say yes to whatever it is God has called me to do.
I'm driving down, and God says to me, you're going to reach the entire Rio Grande Valley. And I'm thinking, wonderful. Can we just survive what we're doing right now? But God's a big God, and He always wants you to have big vision.
My dad called me, and he goes, Danae, there's this opportunity in Weslaco.
I just felt in my heart to call Ted Burns, who's a construction worker here, helped us build this building, actually. And he said, hey, I know this guy. He's a realtor in Weslaco. Why don't you give him a call? I gave him a call, and he said, hey, there's this building that hasn't even gone up that's about to go for sale. It used to be an old Kmart on Business 83 in Weslaco. I walked in, I knew it was God.
Pastor John pulled me and my wife aside at the very beginning of this and just kind of said, do you feel led to go to Weslaco? My wife received a word that very day that he asked us, and she just said, we're going, and we decided to go. So our heart was always to help and to serve in that community. I remember that the time that we announced that, it was called, I believe the capital campaign was called, Is There Not a Cause?
Right now we use part of the building. One day we'll use the entire building for an incredible outreach to that area. So our Spanish ministry, like I said, has had different pastors over the years, and we were going through this one section where we were kind of just, couldn't really find the right person. I even took it over for a while.
Mi esposo y yo empezamos a asistir en noviembre del 2013. Al principio, después de ese llamado que Dios nos hizo a través de nuestro pastor y líder John Brady, estábamos buscando la área en la cual pudiéramos servir. Y recuerdo perfectamente bien que en un muy peculiar caso, Dios habló a mi vida y se abrió la oportunidad de servir en el ministerio de la alabanza.
I remember, watching this fireball lady, up on stage who was helping direct worship. As we know, it's Pastor Linda. And I just knew, and I'd also talked to other staff members. I'm like, this is the lady, to take over Spanish ministry.
Hace 3 años y medio, cuando nuestro pastor, nos citó para una reunión en donde nos expuso la necesidad que había dentro del ministerio de español para que se levantaran nuevos líderes, puesto que la visión de nuestra congregación es expandirnos a nivel valle y ahora pues internacional, ¿verdad? Él nos habló sobre la necesidad de desarrollar nuevos líderes y el interés que tenía sobre que mi esposo Mario y yo fuéramos pastores asociados del ministerio en español.
Here at TFC, we have lots of women leading in ministry. We believe that not only are men called, but women are called.
Los hispanos normalmente no les gusta mucho tener como autoridad o como líderes a una mujer. Y él me dijo, yo no soy hispano. Yo no soy de aquí y yo creo en el ministerio que Dios deposita en mujeres también. Y creo que tú puedes, junto con tu esposo, desarrollar el ministerio del pastorado. Y 3 años y medio después, aquí estamos sirviendo al Señor. Y es nuestra pasión y los amamos. Realmente sabemos que es Dios quien nos movió a tomar este paso de fe.
And the rest really has become history as we've watched Linda just kind of flourish and step into that pastoral role. And what an incredible blessing she is to the church. And we've just seen the Spanish ministry flourish in an incredible way because of what God has put on Linda. What does TFC look like in 25 years? When it's its 100th anniversary? Well, in 25 years, I doubt I'll be the pastor here, but I believe the future of this church is incredible.
I'm blown away by what God has done. I continuously say, oh my goodness, Lord, you are so good.
I see us having multiple campuses in the Rio Grande Valley. I also see us having possibly multiple campuses internationally. I know that's something that God has really been stirring in our hearts is how does this keep going? Because it's not about Pastor John, it's not about Pastor Ricky or myself or you, but it's that legacy that he has started way back 75 years ago at that healing revival.
My wife and I have our little girl, and it's changed my life in such a way that it's changing the life of the generation that comes after me. Because now it's just not me that's following Christ and my wife, but it's my little girl that's going to follow Christ. And after services, she's in the main auditorium and she's on the stage and, she's pretending she's leading worship because of the establishment of the church, because she sees other church members and leaders, and it's literally changing my generations.
When you take and support this church, when you get involved in the church, you're investing into something so much bigger than just what you see today. You're investing into a future that I literally believe that's going to impact the Rio Grande Valley, and I believe with all of my heart, the entire world.
We're a lighthouse to this community. That's a word that's been given to us. We're a lighthouse to the community of the valley, and I believe we're going to continue to do that in a greater and greater way because of the generation coming behind us, because of the generation here, and because God's plan is to reach the valley, and I believe we're a big, big part of that.
We talk about what's going to happen in 2046 when we've been around for 100 years, and I think that we also should be talking about what's going to happen in the next 100. And then the following 100, Jesus is still going to build his church. And we just get to be a part of it.
Tres Lagos is next, and I believe there'll be many, many other campuses.